The train follows a curve in the track, and as it does so, reflections from the windows ripple on the snow. There's a trail of footprints crossing the field. She thinks of children's stories, of wooden houses, of bears and wolves, of huntsmen brewing tea from a samovar. Stories she used to tell her son, Kostya. Wait, there's someone edging towards her along the corridor from the toilets. It's a young man in a red tracksuit with the word sport across his chest. Not Nike, not Adidas, just sport. He stops to enter his compartment, the same compartment as hers. He turns to her, gesturing at the door. Sorry, were you waiting to go back in? She stiffens, shaking her head. I can't sleep. I can't sleep, that's all. Leave me alone, she thinks. Leave me alone. Please don't ask questions. The boy hesitates and presses on. Oh, you'll sleep better once you get home, yeah? That's where you're going, right? You're going home. Home, she thinks. Where's home now? Moscow is never home. Yes, she says eventually. I'm going to Voronezh. Oh, me too, says the boy. But instead of answering him, she looks down at the carpet and just lets the silence hang. The boy shrugs, taking the hint, says, well, good night then. He smiles awkwardly and slides open the door to their compartment. She turns back to the window and presses her nose to the glass. Peering into the night outside, she scans the entire length of the curtain train, looking for the one carriage that casts no light on the snow, the windowless baggage car, carrying the coffin that contains the body of her son.
She wafted the smell away with her hand. Now go and get showered and freshened up for her. Her turned out to be Rita, a young woman in her 20s who worked at the same supermarket as Mama. She was educated, unaffected, and with a disarming habit of tucking her blonde ringlets behind her ear. Rita was studying classical music. Oh, Kostya likes classical music, don't you, Kostya? Mama kept saying. Tell Rita about them symphonies you listen to in your bedroom. Like everyone in Russia, Rita needed money, hence the part-time job at the supermarket. But she aspired to become a professional musician, practicing the violin and going to auditions. Sounds like you, eh, Kostya? Mama panted. You're trying to get a job in the theatre, aren't you? Tell Rita about them theatre jobs you've been applying for. At this point, Mama excused herself, saying that she needed to go to the kitchen to clear up. Rita stood too, eager to leave the table. Let me give you a hand, Tamara Borisovna. Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, Mama said. I should leave you two young people to chat, get to know each other. Rita sat back down. She fidgeted with her hair and forced a smile. Make conversation, I told myself, offering her another glass. She clamped her hand over the glass. Niet, spasibo, she said, and asked me about my plans to get a job in the theatre. I poured myself a bigger glass than I was used to, and as I talked, I sensed Mama listening in from the kitchen, the sound of clattering plates conspicuously absent.
I spent several days moving through the message boards, reading conversations between women about their fantasy husbands, learning forum slang, not posting anything. MHIS, my husband in space, was a common acronym, as was BS before space, EB, earthbound, and CBW came back wrong. MHIS was such a loving partner, a typical post might run, a friend and helpmeet, a wonderful father, but ever since he came back, things have been different. I wonder if he's CBW. 6 years and counting on MHIS might run another. I know us EB wives all have it tough, but sometimes I worry I don't have the natural reserves of patience it takes to make it. It can be very hard just to wait for the end of his MTM, that's Mission to Mars, without so much as a message to let me know he's safe. Most of the time it's easiest not to think about him at all. Beneath each post would run scores of comments, women feeding in with their own fictitious experiences of husbands lost to impossible missions, husbands orbiting the moons of Jupiter, husbands strewn across space. After a while, I started to wonder whether the thrill of the fantasy wasn't so much the thought of their husbands returning as the part where they wished them away. New here, I typed once, EB looking to talk. I lingered over this message for several minutes, but ultimately chose not to post it, finding that none of the acronyms fitted me well enough to bother. I imagined my mother's illness symptoms and read them into the way that I swallowed, the way that I shaped my words. I fell prey to patterns of terrible thinking, imagined myself crowded with cysts, with cancer growing in untreatable skin. I went to the doctor several times detailing imaginary ailments and was asked whether there was anything causing me anxiety. I've always been like this, I wanted to say, it's just that she made it better. The doctor explained that hypochondria's very insidiousness lay in its creeping logic, in the ways that purported to make sense. It's very easy to locate one symptom and then go in search of another, to knit them together in a way that will satisfy almost any diagnosis. If you're experiencing fatigue, vision problems, and tingling hands, the logical conclusion is multiple sclerosis. To a hypochondriac, any other inference smacks of little but refusal to look at the facts. Try, the doctor said, to be a little less logical. Sometimes symptoms just happen, we don't really know why. The weather was changing, wet and bulbous and warm. One day I sat in the window of the bedroom all afternoon and watched the flying ants foam the glass, collecting in the tip, the guttering and overflowing, falling to the gravel drive below. That night, around 10 or 11 o'clock, the phone rang, but the person on the line refused to speak when I answered. The number that flashed on the phone display looked to be that of the centre, but no prompting would persuade the caller to speak, and after 4 minutes of silence, I once again heard the dial tone. After this, I sat on the floor of the kitchen and thought about Leah, about the shape of her feet and the way she spoke about her father, the special voice she used to talk to cats, her kind frown, her intonation, her fingernails. I thought about the time we kissed at the movies and a guy jerked off behind us and I complained to the management. I thought about fucking her on the floor of her uncle's bathroom when we were staying over before a wedding. I thought about the way she often liked to tell me what to liked me to tell her what to do in bed. I thought about the day it first occurred to me that should she die, there would be no one in the world I truly loved. You can, I think, love someone for a very long time before you realize this. Notice it in the way that you note a facial flaw or a speech impediment, some imperfection which, once recognized, can never be again unseen. Are you just now realizing that people die? Leah had said to me when I voiced this thought, tucked up beside her on the sofa with my knees pressed tight into the backs of hers. Not people, I had said, just you. At the start of the 4th month of Leah's absence, I witnessed a fracas on the message board for wives of imaginary spacemen. One woman accused another of failing to treat her fantasy with due courtesy, and the thread quickly descended into a frenzy of recrimination about how one wife's imaginary trauma stacked up against another's. MHIS has been gone for 7 years, one woman posted. MTP, mission to Pluto. No sign, no contact, nothing. Crew presumed dead, no hope of rescue. Think about that before you tell me my story's contrived. Just think, another woman posted in response, that if you were really so cut up about your husband's absence, you wouldn't be posting details here the way you do. Check the community guidelines, a third woman apparently fancying herself psych cop added to the discourse. Don't come for other people's stories, offer the same respect you would expect, have grace and space. Yeah, she says there's been no contact, but she posted just last week about her husband sending her one last message whilst orbiting Pluto. A fourth inserted herself at this point. We're not saying it's a bad story, we're just saying be consistent. I read this thread in its entirety over the course of about an hour. Once I finished, I drank several glasses of wine in quick succession and typed in the comment box that Pluto was no longer a planet. Furthermore, I added, unaware I had clicked on all caps, if you people don't want your husbands, then why do you go to the trouble of making them up in the first place? Directly after posting this, I closed my laptop and dialed the number I had for the centre. The call went straight to voicemail, so I left a message I now remember very little about. I dreamed a lot during that time and in easy colours. Pale water leaking from the cupboard, the notches from an unfamiliar spine-strewn cold across the windowsill. One night I dreamed a congregation, 50 women in formal hats, declaring themselves the acolytes of the Church of the Blessed Sacrament of Our Wives Under the Sea. The church was tall, a plunging upward streak of ceiling that leered into the distant vaulted rafters, then fell beneath our feet to corresponding depths. I sat with legs curled up inside a pew and peered into the vast abyss that should have been the floor, the chancel, aisle, and transepts. The space beneath us seethed with almost movement, dark surge of something otherworldly. A woman I knew stood up towards the altar, arms out, her hair flowing oddly upwards. The convocation raised their hands in imitation, and I looked towards the font, expecting a song or a benediction, a prayer for those long lost. The USS Johnston, said the woman instead, is the deepest shipwreck thus far located at over 20,000 feet. The known wreckage pieces consist of 2 turrets, a propeller shaft and propeller, 2 funnels, a mast, and several unidentified pieces of debris. At the point of sinking, only 141 of the vessel's 327-strong crew was saved. At least 90 managed to disembark the vessel before she sank, but were never seen again. There was a murmur in the congregation, a sound which I was slow to recognize as Amen. In the
Later that evening, after hours had been shouted at down the phone, Simon sat framed by the mucky mirror on the wall. Downstairs, the music rose suddenly, vibrating beneath the dark grey carpet, and then dropped before rising again. They were testing the sound, making sure it was all ready for opening time. They'd open at 8, and his first tour of duty on stage would be at 9. Just the usual, welcoming people, the same old jokes the regulars still had the courtesy to laugh at. He'd use that time to scan the room, check for troublemakers, make a plan for who to try and get up on stage. He'd spot the young students he could bring up willingly, who weren't too shy, who'd join in the dance routines later on. Then he'd come off, have a couple of quick shots, and then on again to lip sync to the club favourites. They won't be his choices, but they were popular, and the manager just wanted the punters to be happy. When they were happy, they bought more drinks. He started with the eyebrows, always, covering them in quick circular motions with a glue stick. His had always been quite thick, not quite joining in the middle, but close, something the kids in school had always pointed out to him. Since doing drag, he'd kept them thinner, further apart, but still, every time he looked at himself in the mirrors, they began to disappear. He saw the odd hill of his head, as if for the first time, and was quietly disgusted by himself. Then he brushed the glue, working out any lumps or creases, getting it as close to his skin and as even as possible, and dabbed away at any excess with a wipe. Below him, the music swelled and fell away in waves. It was so routine to him now that he could lose himself in it, allow his mind to wander to Ryan, who he hadn't spoken to in 2 days, which he knew wasn't all that long really in the grand scheme of things, but felt historic in the rushed month when they'd been in each other's phone every minute and in each other's beds most nights. His foundation was darker than his own skin, but only slightly. The brush was one he'd had for years since he first started, before he knew all about the different types and what they might do, or different design features they might have. He'd picked it out of the plastic tubs they kept the bargains in at the front of the pharmacy, and even though the bristles were loosening, all blown out like an exploded dandelion clock, he liked the familiar feel of it in his hand. He did the base first around the edges, setting the borders of the new face, and then a lighter colour under the eyes, the sides of the nose, the recess above his top lip and his chin. Next it was the sponge, faded from all the shows and all the faces he'd put on, and he blended the lighter and darker foundation together. And then the contour lines, the architecture of the new face, bringing the angles out. The eyeshadow, something that would really pop for the drunks at the back of the room, and the eyelashes sticking on one false pair and then another pair over them, so there's a three-dimensional effect that seemed to make the eyes a deep well to peer down into. And then it was the wig, styled and fluffed on a styrofoam mannequin that had once been thrown out from the college and glued down beneath the line of the hair cap, fastened into place with bobby pins. He closed his eyes as tight as he could, what with the lashes, and sprayed the whole thing with hairspray to hold it in place against the sweat. He put on the glittery, thigh-skimming dress that caught the light and sent it shattering back out onto the dance floor, the same one he'd wore last Sunday, because he knew it would be a different crowd for the different day of the week. Last, he shook his head to check the wig wouldn't come off. It happened to another queen at a club in Rotherham, and the video had gone viral, the butt of a million different jokes, punchlines to things she had nothing to do with. He lived in fear of that happening to him. So the shaking to make sure, and the looking in the mirror to check every angle was just right. He put his phone on charge because this was a dressing room that locked, so it was safe. Checking it one last time to see if there was anything from Ryan. There wasn't. Simon looked at himself one last time in the mirror and stepped out as Patana short dress. In some lights, in some wigs, he was his auntie or his grandma. Not himself, because he was Patana and she was brasher, broader, louder than Simon. And yet he was more himself too, because there weren't the things that he'd tried to hide for so long to hide. In school, he'd had this thing inside him that he was so scared of other people finding out. So each day it felt like an endurance test in holding his breath, in not being seen, in being quiet and meek and hoping simply to not be noticed. That loudness, that comedy, that fearlessness was in there. And in the club, in this wig, in these heels, he didn't have to hide it. He could bring it up from deep down inside him, let it fire him up, let it consume him. It wasn't costume, he often thought, because costume was something more like a disguise, to hide yourself. Whereas now, in the mirror, he felt so much more himself than he ever did. That was it. This was him. Simon knew there was a different world of drag he wanted to explore, away from the TV shows of it, away from performing to hen parties and groups of drunk lads. He knew it could be political, more edgy, that there was a way in which he could bring to the surface things that might otherwise be hidden. What was it his English teacher said once? The fool in Shakespeare always carries the truth. They nearly always had a Yorkshire accent too, Simon remembered, because apparently people found that funnier.